Hey everyone, hope you guys are well. Welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 9 team selection, and we're looking ahead towards a week where I think it's actually rather dull in terms of what the transfers are for a lot of us. Unless you're, let's say, trying to dead end your team into a wildcard 8. It's actually a week where we don't really have too many transfers planned. A lot of us did wildcard on 8, or ultimately, when you actually look at the state of many people's teams, we've got a very, very strong team this week, and it's more so about the case of rolling, ahead towards that great Arsenal fixture, which is basically, in my opinion, Sheffield United at home, probably the best fixture of the season, and that sort of juncture where you maybe consider hopping off of your Spurs assets, whether it's the midfielders or whether it's the defenders. And I actually have a couple questions, of course, that I sort of need to look towards in the future, but not necessarily answer as soon as Game Week 9. But that's why I think it's worth talking about, for example, my transfer plan. So in terms of this week, I do think I'll be rolling. So the idea really is to save another free transfer, given that I wildcarded last week on Game Week 8, and look towards Game Week 10 as an option to potentially go for 2 free transfers and actually use them towards the full sort of maximal capacity because of that Arsenal fixture and, in my opinion, what is an Arsenal fixture swing. Now, of course, Arsenal will still play Newcastle in Game Week 11, so you can argue that the fixture swing doesn't necessarily start. But I think, for example, the strength of a fixture like Sheffield United is so much stronger, for example, than how poor, for example, the Newcastle game is. I do really think it's the best time to jump onto an Arsenal asset. So, in my opinion, especially since Spurs don't have a particularly great game from an attacking point of view in Game Week 10, it is a perfect juncture to sort of hop off your Spurs midfielders as well. And when you sort of look towards fixtures from Game Weeks 11 to like 14 onwards, I do think Arsenal, for example, still have comparably better fixtures, even though they do have Newcastle right around the corner. So my 2 transfer plans are actually this. It's either Trippier and Richarlison out into either Tsimikas or Gabriel plus Saka, or an alternative move where I actually keep Trippier and instead look towards getting both Richarlison and Son out. Now, Richarlison and Son are obviously in different positions in my team. I think Richarlison clearly is the odd man out. He's always the one that I am sort of focused on transferring out. But I also have the opportunity of maybe transferring out Son just because that could actually allow me to, let's say, take an upgrade over Richarlison and maybe take a downgrade over Son. Son, obviously, being someone like Saka in the future can be interesting just because that money in the bank could allow me to get someone like Martinelli. So I could actually go for Martinelli and Saka from Richarlison and Son. That is basically one of my transfer plans. And then the last transfer plan that I have is just a straight transfer out of Richarlison just because he is that odd man out to Mitoma on Game Week 10, which I also quite like as a transfer move. It would allow me to keep all of these players. Unfortunately, of course, it doesn't give me the Arsenal or even the Liverpool assets that I probably would actually want to tap into, particularly if, let's say, the Tsimikas position looks fantastic and in Game Week 9 doesn't really seem like he'll be losing his position, going forwards just based on whatever Liverpool feature. Because yes, of course, Joe Gomez is a risk for Tsimikas, but ultimately I'm not necessarily set on Tsimikas. If I go for the Trippier transfer route, it is still an option to actually simply go towards a Gabriel or a Zinchenko in that structure. As far as the double transfer in the midfield position, I can be quite flexible, right? I can still go Mitoma and also Saka as well, save some money in the bank and actually maybe play around that. So those are all my options, and I think it's quite an interesting juncture as well, because you can look at Gordon, my team, and probably say maybe you'd like to upgrade him. So maybe actually going out of Son, saving money in the bank, going Mitoma as well, can also be quite fruitful for the future. So that could also be a transfer. So a lot of plans, all of them really centered around Richarlison and which sort of midfielder I would like to prioritize. Personally, I do think Saka is sort of the priority transfer for me, but I can understand a lot of people sort of rather sidestepping the Saka move, holding on to a great asset like Heung-min Son, and then actually moving away from, let's say, Richarlison instead, or the equivalent in terms of Maddison, which is a player that a lot of people own within their teams. Now, I understand a lot of people are reluctant to move off of Maddison because of some of the price rises that he's enjoyed so far, and a lot of managers have enjoyed as well. The query, of course, is this a juncture with better fixtures for other midfielders? And I do think that is the case. It's the same reason why, for example, I sort of moved off of Julian Alvarez on my own wild card, moving towards Watkins for the short term. I do think I'll be moving back into Julian Alvarez quite shortly, but it is a reality that Aston Villa simply still have better fixtures than Man City for now from the attacking point of view. So those are kind of my transfer plans. As far as Game Week 9, just looking back to it, obviously it's just a case of making sure that I line up my team in exactly the best way possible. So starting with the defender positions, I've got Turner here. Once again, another opportunity to play Turner. We were actually, I would say, quite surprised to actually see Turner start once again. He did have a slightly poor performance versus Brentford. He himself admitted towards that. but he was able to start in the previous match versus Crystal Palace, got his clean sheet, and honestly, we're hoping for another one here. Now it's a home fixture. You're against Luton Town, a weaker offensive team, even compared to Crystal Palace that seem to be completely toothless right now. And I am hoping for a clean sheet once again with another keeper versus Luton Town at home, although the last time that happened in Pickford did not turn out very, very well. As far as the rest of the defense, though, I will be fielding out Cash, Pedro Porro, and Trippier. This is once again a perfect Trippier week, and also why I'm sort of okay with, let's say, dropping Trippier after this, because the fixtures after this aren't as perfect as a Crystal Palace fixture at home. And you also have to consider, for example, and contextualize as well, that this Newcastle team will have some easier matches, but they're all away, and also they're not at the same standard, really. If you look at clean sheet odds, for example, for the next few weeks, yes, of course, Wolves is a great fixture, Bournemouth away is a good fixture, but there really aren't fixtures as good as something like Sheffield United away or something like Burnley at home. So I would also say that ultimately it is the time to think about whether you actually want to keep Trippier forever, and that might be something that I would like to do. But I also think you should just be open, because if you're, let's say, on a Salah Holland structure, someone has to go. Whether it's Madison, who, for example, didn't make it towards my wildcard draft, or Trippier, who was also close to not being my wildcard draft until the very end when I decided to swap around. So with Pedro Porro, I do actually think that he's a little bit more of a long-term hold. I don't think Spurs' defense are necessarily particularly good, but he actually is a very attacking fullback, and you can see obviously the fullbacks being utilized as such. And so I do like Pedro Porro, just because some of the opponents, for example, let's say when you're looking even at game week 10, Crystal Palace away, I don't really have that much confidence anyways in Crystal Palace as an attacking team. So it is a good fixture for me to still, for example, own Pedro Porro there. As far as, let's say, Cash, he just has a better fixture next week. So it's a case of, obviously, this is the best fixture possible this week because I have Colwell, unfortunately, who has a home fixture, but it's Arsenal, and they are nowhere near, right, as weak an attacking sort of side as West Ham. Now, obviously, a lot of people have actually moved into West Ham assets, and I'm not saying West Ham will blank and Cash will get a clean sheet, but just comparably, the fixtures are not even close. I think we would still consider West Ham to be a much weaker attacking team than Arsenal. And also, when we talk, let's say, defensive strength, I think Chelsea's actually better than Aston Villa as well. But once again, the gulf really just due to Arsenal is there. As far as the midfield, though, I will be fielding Gordon for the first time. I obviously kept him on the bench, decided to wildcard with him. Some people actually opted to go for Gibbs White as well, just because he's got Luton Town at home, and arguably, when you have a chance to actually get a penalty taker at that sort of price point, you'll probably take it. But I do really like Gordon. I really like this Newcastle team. I think their attacking strength is vastly underrated. They are still a top 3, top 4 attack to me in the Premier League. And ultimately getting access to, let's say, a starting left winger who probably has better minutes than his comparative option on the right-hand side in Almiron is something that's very interesting to me. Gordon's open play numbers have been very good. Now, historically, obviously, you can say as a young player, we don't really have the same confidence in his ability to deliver the goods, but so far, to me, he's looked amazing, and I do think that there's a punt here that I'm happy to take, and that's why I'm going for this punt with Gordon. As far as Richarlison, I'm sort of forced to play with him. I don't really think, for example, playing Archer makes sense, even though United's defense is still in tatters. It's just a case where I think because Richarlison's probably still going to start the fixture, although he might not actually play more than 60 minutes, that for me is enough, right? That chance to just play Fulham for at least 45 minutes of football is something that I'm sort of punting with Richarlison here, just because Fulham are such a poor defensive team. We have talked about that lately, and no surprise, for example, that they've been leaking a lot of goals and even conceding versus Sheffield United, which is honestly a hallmark of what a poor defense really looks like, even though I recognize, of course, City also conceded. What I'm trying to say, obviously, is when you look at expected stats, like, for example, the expected goals against that Fulham have actually conceded so far, it is shocking, and they are truly one of the worst defensive teams. Now, Salah, of course, is someone that I will be easily fielding, and the same with Diaby and Son. We do hear news, of course, that Son has been dealing with a niggling injury, and that has continued within the international break. It seems like he didn't even find himself in a position to be sort of fit for that second fixture, because obviously he was being rested in the first. And it is a context where I think, once again, you'll see Son be managed in terms of minutes, and it is no surprise, but also keep in mind that Spurs have a Monday fixture as opposed to everyone else who at least has, for example, Sunday morning or a Sunday fixture. What the Spurs players have, and the huge benefit to why I went for Richarlison on the wild card, is the fact that they are playing on the Monday evening. And I do think, for example, yes, of course, Brennan Johnson will probably feature, but will he start after, let's say, an entire month of absence? I'm not so sure. So I think I have quite a lot of confidence, even though Richarlison was such an early sub, due to the Bissouma red card that he will start again. But that is sort of just what I have to deal with right now. This week isn't the best for me when it comes to the bench. A lot of players will have much better fixtures next week. For example, when I look at the bench next week, Colwell can be played versus Brentford at home. Lamptey can be played versus Fulham at home if, let's say, Estupiñán's not back and he's actually ready and fit for the game. And Archer, of course, is just Archer. I mean, you're just expecting 2 appearance points for now. I think obviously this is a good home fixture just because of how poor United are, but it's not like I have any incentive to really start him when I can maybe punt Richarlison for 45 minutes. And as far as the forward line this week, I will be fielding both Watkins and Haaland. Looking forward, of course, in the future to when I will be able to play Watkins and Diaby and Cash versus Luton Town at home. I do hope that bears out with good dividends. As far as, let's say, Haaland, the question, of course, this week is not about Haaland and Salah or Haaland less. For me, it's just a question about captaincy, right? Because I'm already invested into this team structure here with Haaland and Salah. Personally, for me, I think the captaincy is something that I will be going with Erling Haaland for. I think it's a great captaincy for Son, Salah, and Haaland. But when I look at, for example, just minutes purely, I think Son's going to struggle for minutes because clearly he's still struggling with a sort of condition, and it wasn't really well managed given the fact that he played the full game in the Korean friendly. And then on top of that, of course, you're just competing with superstar options in Salah and Haaland. So no fears, you're all having potential penalty takers here as well with all great home fixtures. So I would probably pick between Salah and Haaland. I have Haaland in my team. I do think actually Brighton's defense has been shocking so far. Everton have actually been more so a surprise from the attacking point of view, less so in the defensive point of view. I think they've actually been pretty dismaying, if we're being honest. But comes down to the fact that Brighton really are one of the worst sort of form sides when it comes to defense. And it's not necessarily something that we can say has only been attributed towards the season. We saw some displays last season that were quite alarming, I would say. For example, the performance versus Everton that I'm reminded of, where McNeil, I think, scored a hat-trick, amongst others. And when we look at underlying data, it supports the fact that Brighton have slowly been a worse team from the defensive point of view, but obviously, one of the world beaters, really, not only in the Premier League, but just internationally, I would say, when you look across all European leagues when it comes to attack under De Zerbi. So it is a double-edged sword, and I do think, of course, when we look at players like Estupiñán, yes, of course, they have attacking threat, but we don't look at Brighton as a team that really defends quite well. So I am looking at a situation here where I think it's a very clear Haaland captaincy, but I can completely understand people who've gone off of Haaland, and Salah becomes a very, very logical captain. So that's going to be my team for this week, hoping that you guys all have a wonderful week. It's not very often you actually get to see, for example, 11 out of 11 all at home. So I hope this goes well for us this week. Game week 10 will be interesting because I think there's going to be a lot of question marks in terms of what I'm actually fielding from a bench point of view. But I'll be looking forward, of course, to tracking the minutes of all my players and seeing whether I can make some more interesting moves going forward. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. If you guys can also do me a favor, please do smash the like button. We'll try to get 400 likes on this video, and I hope you guys have lovely green arrows ahead.